Today's synth exploration is sponsored by DistroKid, so if you want to release your music onto Spotify, iTunes and other great stores, use DistroKid and my link in the description for a discount. DistroKid costs $20 a year, and with that you can upload unlimited amounts of music to all the stores. Hello there and welcome to another Bobeats synthesizer video, and today we are taking a look at something that is super exciting and I think that a lot of you have been waiting for it. It is the KORG Drumlogue. I've had the KORG Drumlogue here for a couple of weeks and I've been testing it out and trying different things on it, and in today's video we're gonna look at how it sounds, how you make music on it, if it actually works as a groovebox. A little spoiler, it's a very limited groovebox, but it has some groovebox functionalities. More about that later in today's video. And we're also going to talk about a few limitations of the device, a few negatives and some bugs that are still present. So this device was sent to me by KORG, and as usual they have no say over my content. They don't get to watch the video beforehand, and I hope that I will give you a good idea of what this device can do, what it can't do, and some things that I think it could do even better. So let's start with what the Drumlogue is. Here's the main things that you need to know before we dive deeper. First up, it's an 11-voice drum machine combining 4 analog voices and 6 sample-based voices, which can be either a sample that the unit comes with or one of the samples that you've loaded into it. There's also the 11th voice, the multi-sound source. The multi-sound source can be the default VPM synthesizer, or it can generate noise, or it can be another custom synthesizer. And the unit ships with the SignVibes Nano synthesizer, which sounds something like this. In terms of effects, you have reverb and delay as send effects, and there's also selectable master effects. There's also sidechaining. You can also load custom effects, but I should note that as of filming this, I don't think there's any custom effects or synths out there for the Drumlogue, but I would be surprised if nobody developed synths and effects for the Drumlogue. The sequencer is 64 steps, and it has some quite interesting tricks that we will get into later in the video. And the unit has a stereo output as well as 4 individual output, and something that is really cool, there is a USB host functionality, so it can actually power a MIDI keyboard or say the Poly and Play from this second USB port. which is actually really nice, and it's also quite unique to have 2 USB ports. Now, the Drumlogue is not without its own problems and limitations, and I think that the biggest limitation for me is the small sample memory. You only have about 34 megabytes of sample memory for loading your own samples. So you can load about 100 samples into the unit and you can get really far with that, but it is a limitation that you should be aware about. And the second limitation is that while the KORG Minilogue and Monologue and the Minilogue XD were all knob per function devices, this device has a fair bit of menu diving and shift commands to access all the different things that you might want to use, and we'll get into that later in the video. It's not a huge problem. I find it very intuitive and fast to use, but it's something to keep in mind. And here's a quick overview. We have volume control for the individual voices. We have the master volume, we have tempo, we have page up and down, which you use to go through different settings pages. We have the mutes. And over on this end, we have control over the bass drum, the snare drum, we have the toms, we have the closed hi-hat, open hi-hat, we have the clap. These are of course selectable. You can have whatever samples you want here. And then we have sample 1 and sample 2 controls over here. These 4 encoders are used to control the corresponding 4 parameters. Start, record, we have program select, which is basically your pattern and pattern data. You have your kit select, so this machine uses a kit structure, so you can save different drum kits with different sounds, and the unit comes preloaded with a lot of kits and also a lot of preset patterns. If you press live, you can play the drum sounds. Chaining basically lets you chain together programs into a simple song structure. It's not an advanced song mode, it's more a pattern chaining. So when we are under chain, you just press a button here, and then you select whatever you want, and then you've chained it. So it's not an advanced song mode, it's basic pattern chaining. We then have the loop function, which lets you loop individual steps or multiple steps, which I will show you later. We then have the pattern edit with step, you can place down steps, accents, which lets you set accent, ratchets, and the motion sequencer, which lets you record automations either live or by holding down a step. So it's very similar to how the motion sequencer works on, say, the Minilogue XD. Over here we have pattern control, so we can jump between up to 64 steps. And over here we have different settings for pattern speed, triplets, and timing. And these settings can be set either globally or per part, so per sound. So in terms of build and feel, it does feel pretty nice. It's a really nice, small, compact form factor. Here it is compared to, for example, the Keystep 37. So you can see how small it is. It makes it very easy to just put it on a table and have fun with alone, or you can have it in a setup. You could even have it as a sound module if you don't want to use the sequencer. And another literally small but important thing is that we have a mini jack input, so you can input audio through the unit, either dry or through the effects, the reverb and delay and the master effect, as well as using it for side chaining. So there is that on a mini jack. The way I started to explore the Drumlogue was by creating a few different kits from scratch, and here's just one example. And I was using the loop function, which lets you loop different steps. And then I loaded 2 custom samples, this bass and this lead sound. And I used a nano synthesizer, which is made by Sine Vibes, to create a little drone. And together it sounds like this. And since I'm a groovebox guy, I of course wanted to explore whether or not we could use the Drumlogue as sort of a groovebox, and the short answer is yes, you definitely can. Since you can load pretty much whatever sample you want into it, you can turn it into this kind of interesting, kind of old school, quite limited groovebox, sample-based groovebox. And in addition to the samples, you do have a synth engine. So yeah, you can create beats on it. One thing to note is that if you want to use it as a groovebox, there's a lot of moving between step and motion. So step here shows the steps. Here, for example, are the chords, and motion shows the automation. So here I have different automations recorded. And if I go in here and I check, for example, tuning, I can actually, if I go back here and see there's a step, I can hold the step, I can change the tuning, and now I can see +2 tuning, and I can change it up and down, so you can see here. So there's a lot of that going on if you want to create like a chord progression. You can even have multiple different kinds of samples on just one track as well. You can lock different samples to different steps. So yeah, kind of interesting. So for this beat, I have this chord progression with some filter automation recorded as well. And here's the drum groove. And I added a bass. You can of course also connect the keyboard to the unit and play, for example, the synth engine or the samples using the keyboard. This is really easy to set up, works really well, except that there's a bug currently. I hope the KORG will be fixing this, where when I'm playing, it seems like the note ties are not being recorded correctly into the sequencer. So what I'm playing is not actually ending up in the sequencer. Even if I do it unquantized or quantized, like, it seems to not be working properly. So that's something just to know. I have forwarded this information to KORG and I hope that they will fix it. And I also made a more hip-hop oriented beat using a couple of different chord samples that I also loaded into the Drumlogue. So those were my first experiments with the Drumlogue, but now let's create something from scratch so you get an idea of how it works and what it can do. So now let's make a beat. We go into step and we place down steps here. We can drive the kick, change the tuning of the kick, the decay of the kick, and we also have volume control for the voices. We can select a different part, so use the part button here to select between different parts, the different sounds. Snare drum, go into step again. So here we have snap decay, we have tuning and decay. And these knobs here and other settings can of course be motion sequenced. We'll get into that, but just to show you really quickly, we can go into motion here and we can select, for example, the second snare hit over here, and we can change, for example, the tuning and the snappiness of the sound. Let's add a closed hi-hat and take a look at some of the settings available to us. So if we press page here, you can see that we can change the sound select for the hi-hat because it's sampled. And these sounds can also be motion sequenced, which is pretty cool. But you can't just change the sample, you can also change the tuning, the attack, the start and end of the sample. You can also add a filter, so we can low pass or high pass. We can add resonance. And we can of course motion sequence this. We can add some drive. So we could, for example, just hold down a step here and change this bit reduction here per step. We can also change panning and stereo spread. So let's do that on a few steps. And we can also send to the reverb and the delay. Before we dive even deeper into the sequencer and finish up our little beat here, I just want to take a pause and look at the bass drum and the snare drum and kind of give you an idea of what they can sound like and the range. In the settings menu for the kick, we have the transient. And you can also mix this in using this attack parameter. We also have settings for sweep and sweep time. So we can get really hard kicks like this, kicks like this, or like this. So I think that there is a lot of range to the type of kick sounds you can get out of this device. I'm only scratching the surface here. And just like for the other voices, we have a filter with resonance. And then we have the snare with tuning, decay, and the snappy decay. We also have different types of snappiness. So that's basically a bit of noise that you add to the sound. We can also mix in the snap. And we can change the tone of the sound. And there's also a filter with cutoff and resonance yet again. Now let's get back to the beat that we were working on. So we've put down a few steps and recorded some automation. Now what we can also do is, if we go under step, is we can hold down a step and we get a little menu, and here we can change the probability. We can also check if we want it to alter the playback. So for example, if it looks like this, it plays the first time around that the pattern is playing. And if like this, it's the second time around. So there's different alternations of playing back the steps available. And you can also micro adjust the timing of each step by changing the offset here. But there's even more hiding here in the sequencer. So if we go to accent, we can hold down a step. Here we can change the accent level, but we can also set ratchets. And we can set a ramp. So it's basically if the volume goes up or down or stays the same, or if it's random. So let's do something like this. Now I want to set the different pattern length for the hi-hats only. So hold down part, press time, and now we can set this particular track or part to only 14. And what's also hiding under the time menu, by holding shift and part and time, we can set a groove type either for the entire pattern or per part. And the groove type that you select impacts the velocity and the timing of the steps that you have put down. So here are programs of percussions, and I've added the conga 1 type to the groove just to give it a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more swing. Now this far I just want to highlight the motion sequencer a bit more. So when we are playing and recording and we're changing something, for example the tuning, you can see that the screen represents the changes. So we get a graphic representation of what's going on, but also if you hold down a step and we just change the tuning, you can see here on the screen that the values change. So it might not sound super authentic, but you can make some fun stuff with this motion sequencer. For example, changing the spread of certain steps and changing the panning of certain steps. So like I said, what I did here was not super realistic, but sounds kind of interesting and fun. Now let's go back to the kick drum. I just want to add a few steps, and we're going to use a combination of things that we've already talked about. So I'm going to move, I'm going to hold down this step here, and I'm going to go here, and I'm going to set it to 1. So it just plays the first time around, and then I'm going to put down a step here, and I'm going to set it to the second, and here another one to the second, and this step here plays the first time around. So and we're gonna go in here, I'm gonna put down a step first. We're gonna change this one to only play the first time, and this step here is gonna play the second time, and we're gonna add a ratchet to it. Let's see here, let's do random. Nice. Let's add a second step here, and let's add so it only plays the second time. So something like this. So we're still only working with 16 steps here, and you can have up to 64 steps in a sequence. You can also have the different parts here at different pattern lengths, creating interesting polyrhythmic figures. And a small thing about the probability setting actually works together with this alternation setting. So if you have it set so a step only plays every other time that the pattern repeats, you can also set a probability for that step to play, so they work together, which is actually very nice. You also have a low tom and a high tom, so we have decay here, tuning, and detuning. And in terms of other settings for the toms, we have the click, so a bit of transient, we have the sweep time, and the attack. There's also a drive setting, so it's either off or it's low or high. And just like with the other voices, you can send to the delay and reverb, and for the high tom the settings are basically the same. Let's add an open hi-hat, and it's a sample of course, so you can go in here and change the open hi-hat to whatever other sound that you want. You can even go to the user page here, pick something like this. Some of the samples that I've loaded. So while the sample voices here are all the same, we also have a multi-engine. And the multi-engine can be either its default synth engine, which is basically like an FM synth, or it can be a noise generator or a user synthesizer. So currently, if we select the user here, there is only one synth available that is made for this format. And KORG, of course, hopes that others will be making synths for the Drumlogue as well. And it's good to note that this synth here, the Nano, which is made by Sine Vibes, it's not the same thing as an oscillator for the Minilogue XD. This is more of a fully fledged synthesizer. So we, for example, can select different waveforms. We can detune, can balance between the different waves. There's also different filter types, key tracking, resonance, and we also have different EG types. We can add EG to pitch, for example, or EG to cutoff. And there's even an LFO here that we can access and send it to pitch or to the cutoff. So that's pretty cool. And you can, of course, record changes to the pitch of the synthesizer into the sequencer. You can also connect a keyboard to the Drumlogue and play the synth that way. So I'm gonna change the speed here, and we're gonna program a little bass. And here we go. So that's how you make a beat on the Drumlogue. It's pretty straightforward, didn't take me a long time to learn, but there are a bunch of shift commands that you will need to learn to fully utilize it, but it's not too difficult. You just have to ask yourself if you like this sort of workflow or if you want something that is more, knob per function. Something like a drum brute, for example, where you have knob per function. Now, everything isn't great with the Drumlogue. I have some bugs to report. I also have one big negative that I want to talk about and give you my final thoughts. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Here's 5 reasons to try out DistroKid. Firstly, you sign up for about $20 a year and you can upload unlimited amounts of music. Secondly, it's really quick and easy to upload. Basically, anyone can do it without any prior knowledge. 3, there are different tiers of subscriptions. So if you want to release your music under, say, different artist names, or if you're starting a label, DistroKid has an option for you. 4, DistroKid lets you upload to relevant stores and streaming services such as Spotify and iTunes, and it doesn't take long for the music to be available in the stores. 5, there's also the hyperfollow feature, which automatically creates a custom page where people can find out where to buy or listen to your music, and I personally really like this feature. So go and check out DistroKid using my link in the description. You get a little discount and you support the channel. Lastly, in today's video, let's talk about some bugs, limitations, and negatives. The bugs that I have noticed are the following. When I'm using the Drumlogue with an external keyboard, there seems to be an issue with the note ties. It seems bugged. So when I record a sequence and have drawn out notes, for example, it doesn't seem to be recording the ties and the pitches of the notes correctly. So that's a little annoying, makes it less useful or usable as a groovebox, because I want to use an external keyboard because it's quite slow to program pitch changes, because it's not a groovebox, it's a drum machine, but with some groovebox functionality. So they really need to just make sure that the sequencer works with an external keyboard properly, and I have forwarded this information to KORG, and I do hope that they will be working on it. I've also encountered a bug where I press the mute button and I can't see correctly whether or not a track is muted or not. So of course this has to be displayed correctly so that I can reliably see whether a track is muted or not. Another potential bug or perhaps an oversight is that the sample 1 and sample 2 tracks have dedicated pitch controls on the unit, but no pitch control in the menu, making parameter locking the pitch, especially for sample track 2, more difficult because you have to hold shift to change the tuning of sample track 2, and since there's no setting in the menu, you can't just hold a step and change that setting if you want to automate, say, the pitch change. So that's something I want to see. Beside the bugs, I only have one substantial complaint about the Drumlogue, and that is its very limited sample memory. It's about 34 megabytes, and while that will get you about 100 samples or so, I just think that a larger memory would have made more sense, seeing as it's a sample-based drum machine. It's not only sample-based, you have the analog engine, you have the synth engines, but still, a lot of the tracks are sample-based, so you would want to have a lot of samples on it, I think. More samples also means that it would work even better as a groovebox. A wish I have is that KORG will allow us to have a USB stick connected to it with samples on it, so you could load even more samples. I doubt that will happen though, because it seems that the samples are loaded into some kind of working memory, some kind of RAM, so maybe that's why there's a 34 megabyte limit, because we're not streaming from like an internal hard drive, it's loaded into the RAM of the unit. That's just a guess. Maybe it doesn't work that way, but it would make sense. And here's a quick thing that I want to bring up that I don't particularly like about the design of the Drumlogue, and that is that it uses a program and kit structure. So what does this mean? Well, it means that the patterns are saved in one place and then you have kits. The sounds are saved in another place. This is, however, a personal preference of mine because it's not an unusual design. For example, my Modor DR2 drum machine that I'm going to review has the same kind of setup, but I just prefer the Electron way where you have projects and you load a project and that project contains multiple patterns that you can then chain together in whatever way you want. So it's really a preference thing, but I thought I'd bring it up. Here are some final thoughts. Going into this review, I was asking myself, can the Drumlogue become for drum machines what the Minilogue became for synthesizers? And my answer is no, I don't think so. The Minilogue family is characterized by being super hands-on and very, very accessible, whereas the Drumlogue, while it's not inaccessible, it definitely has a little bit of a steeper learning curve and slightly less accessible design. There's no knob per function and there's more shift commands that I hope I've showed you in today's video. So while there's definite Minilogue DNA in the Drumlogue, it definitely feels like its own thing. And while you need to learn shift commands and where everything's located in the menus, it's still quite fast to use and it's fun to use. It's also very easy to make drum beats on it. It's even easy to make musical loops, and you could even use it as a limited groovebox. So to me, the Drumlogue offers a fresh take on drum machines with a combination of analog, digital and samples. It feels new, but also kind of classic, especially when I've been using it as more of a sample player slash groovebox. It's also expandable if we get some good third-party synths and effects made for it. And to me, the Drumlogue just sounds really good. And I also love the form factor. I love how small it is. I love I can use it as a drum machine in its own right. I can also use it as a drum module because of its small size. So it might not be the Minilogue of drum machines, but it's still a really interesting machine that I think has a really good place in today's market because it's small, it combines digital and analog, it's quite hands-on, but it also has depth. It has an interesting sequencer. You can use it as a drum module if you want to. So I think personally that it ticks a lot of different boxes, which makes it very interesting, and there's not a ton of other products on the market that can compete with what it offers. So that's the KORG Drumlogue, and now I need a sip of the coffee. I hope you found today's review entertaining and educational, and as always, leave a comment down in the description letting us all know what you think about the KORG Drumlogue. Is this what you wanted? Did you want something else? As always, I'm really interested to hearing your thoughts down in the comment section. So have a great day. Talk to you later.